Godless Reads, the Chilling Tales for Dark Night show where godless authors read their own stories. I'm Drew Stepek, owner of Godless.com and the Godless app. This week on Godless Reads, we bring you Ezekiel Kincaid, the Reverend of Horror, with his story Bone Box. Ezekiel actually is a reverend in real life, and he has a monthly series on Godless called Southern Discomfort. You should check that shit out. And Bone Box takes place in New Orleans, the greatest fucking city in the world. And it's also the location for the greatest movie of all time in the world, Angel Heart. So if you like Southern fried bayou horror from New Orleans, you're gonna fucking love this story. Since this is the 23rd episode of Godless Reads, we're almost at the end of season 2, if you can fucking believe that. If you haven't lately, go check out Godless.com or the Godless app. We got all sorts of kick-ass shit you're not gonna find anywhere else. For instance, you can get 3 of these badass shirts for 25 fucking bucks, dude. It's nuts. You know what to do, brothers and sisters. Kick back, grab that fucking drug of choice, and let Ezekiel Kincaid take you inside his bone box. Bone box. Bone box. Bone box.
Bone Box by Ezekiel Kincaid. Navia folded the lapels of her rain jacket up around her ears, nestling her chin into the collar. Her curly black hair gave way to the wind, and the cooler weather made the skin on her lush ebony face tingle. The rain turned from a mist to a sprinkle, so she picked up her pace. She glanced up at the sky. The sun hid behind a canvas of overcast clouds, and the buildings from the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans loomed over her, as if the windows were eyes tracking her movement. She was a sophomore at Benjamin Franklin High, but was skipping out today. Not like it mattered. She had all A's and seemed to be the only one of her friends who cared about making something better out of her life. Missing one day wasn't going to kill her. She hoped not, anyway. Navia paused, then retrieved a crumpled piece of notebook paper from her pocket. It read, Dambala's Occult and Voodoo. Abandoned Holy Cross School. 3rd floor, room 313. Madame Moribou. Some of the falling rain splattered on the paper, making the black ink run. She had jotted it down in a hurry. The little boy telling her the whereabouts of the shop seemed nervous. No, terrified was more like it. She still remembered the expression on his face. Bulging eyes, as if someone strangled him. Quivering lips, and words shaking as he spoke. Navia wadded up the paper and stuffed it back into her jacket pocket. Her eyes danced around and inspected the buildings again. Almost there. 2 more blocks. She tucked her head, looked straight forward, and walked. She avoided eye contact with the homeless people curled up next to the opening of an alleyway. They made Navia nervous, not because they were bad people, but because they were desperate people, and desperate people would do whatever they needed to do to survive, including robbing a young girl in broad daylight. Across the street, a drug deal was going down. She saw them out the corner of her eye and walked. "Don't let them notice me," she prayed. "The fuck you looking at, mamas?" one of the young black men said to her. No prayers answered today. "You looking for a fat Haitian blunt?" another one of them asked. "Or maybe a fat dick," one of them joked, grabbing his crotch at her. "Fuck," Navia whispered. "Out of all the days for people to actually know I exist," she thought. The group of 3 men headed towards her. She walked faster, and so did they. Seconds later, they swarmed her, like bees from the Candyman's bosom. "Where you going, bitch?" The man was short and stocky with a broad face, wide nose, and wide-set eyes. He seemed to be their leader. Perspiration formed under Navia's armpits, and her mouth went dry. Her heart fluttered, and muscles grew weak. Nowhere, just walking." "Fuck, Roscoe," one of the guys said and slapped their leader on the arm. "She's just taking a stroll in this lovely neighborhood, enjoying the sights." They all laughed. "Is that true, mamas?" Roscoe said. "Just taking a stroll down our lovely street. I mean, the sights are great. We got homeless people doing an orgy over there." He pointed out the alley. "We got hoes working shit for their blow." He nodded at a woman walking down the street. And we got nice scenery. He lifted his eyes to the abandoned buildings. Ain't that right, Axe? He said to another man who hadn't spoken yet. Yeah, the motherfucking Grand Palace. Everything a little bitch could want, Axe said. Please, Navia muttered. I don't want no trouble. Just let me go. That ain't how it works, mamas, Roscoe said. You come strolling down our fucking street like you own the motherfucker. Best tell us where you going. Navia reached for her pocket. Roscoe pulled up his shirt, revealing his piece. Easy, bitch. What you reaching for? Navia shook her head. Nothing, paper. Just a piece of paper. Roscoe nodded. Navia retrieved the wadded paper from her pocket, unfolded it, and handed it to Roscoe. I'm looking for Madame Morabouze, she said. Roscoe read her scribblings, then handed it to Axe. Look at that shit, Roscoe said. Axe read it and shook his head, then handed the paper back to Navia. His demeanor changed, and he spoke with a serious tone. Listen, mamas, you don't want to fuck with this shit. Madame Morabou? He paused and glanced at Roscoe. Roscoe said, you need to turn your little ass around and go back to school and forget all about this. Navia looked up at Roscoe. She furrowed her brow and tilted her head. Why? Roscoe got nose to nose with her. This ain't the tourist voodoo shit you see in the shops off Royal Street in Decatur. This is the real fucking deal, mamas. You ain't got no fucking clue what you were fucking with. Navia narrowed her eyes, and her insides grew hot. Don't know what she was fucking with? The hell she didn't. She came down here because she was tired of the propaganda. She had been reading all the stories and tales of the real voodoo priests and priestesses. She had been studying the art for 3 years now, and what she had found so far was lacking. I know exactly what I'm fucking with, she snarled. Now, if you aren't going to kill me or rape me, could you please let me pass? Roscoe backed up. He glanced at his friends, then Navia. Go, bitch, but we warned you. They let Navia pass. Fucking pussies, she mumbled under her breath. Minutes later, she stood before the abandoned Holy Cross School. The building loomed over her like an urban Gothic monument. The windows were busted out on all 3 floors. The bricks were faded and tattered with graffiti. The wood rotted in places, and the front door had a chain wrapped around its metal handles. Navia inhaled, then let out a long breath. She watched as a warm air met the cold and materialized. Her stomach knotted up, and she felt her heart beating in her ears. She hadn't been afraid until now, until being face to face with the building. It was as if the structure was a living creature. A dark presence radiated from it, and she sensed it settling on her skin. She pulled the paper from her pocket and gave it one last glimpse. She crumpled it, threw it on the ground, and approached. The lock around the doors was a dummy lock. She unwrapped the chain, cracked the doors, and squeezed between them. The smell assaulted her nostrils. Navia coughed and covered her face with the inner part of her arm. Her mouth watered and her stomach turned, but she didn't puke. The building reeked of piss, shit, and a faint copper scent. Dim rays of light from the windows zigzagged over the steps of the flight of stairs in front of her. I guess I go up, she thought. Navia approached the steps and ascended halfway. She paused, listening. The only sound she heard was the whistling of a breeze through the drafty building. The further she climbed, the more pressure she felt on her chest. The weight of the dark presence pushed down on her, and it seemed like the walls were closing in on her. She had never been claustrophobic, but something about this place made her feel as if she had been stuffed inside a small trunk. She arrived at room 313. It wasn't hard to miss. There were symbols scratched in the door. She recognized them as VEGA symbols, but she wasn't familiar enough to know which gods they were for. There was a faint chanting coming from inside the room. She cracked the door and peeked in. An elderly African-American lady with silver hair stood before an altar with incense. She was wearing a black robe, and a goat skull with gigantic horns rested atop of her head. The evil eye was painted in the middle of the goat's forehead in red. "Aren't you supposed to be in school?" the lady said in a thick Haitian accent. "Girls like you shouldn't be exploring these parts. Might find something you're not supposed to." Navia jumped, then backed away from the door. The lady turned her head in a slow motion towards Navia, and she saw the lady's eyes and gasped. They were solid white orbs with faint blue veins running through them. Blind, Navia thought. Blind as a fucking bat and creepy as hell. Maybe I should just... Then again, the lady said, you might find just what you're looking for. Come in, Navia. Navia eased towards the door. How did you know? The lady pointed at the evil eye. Just because I'm blind doesn't mean I can't see, child. Navia opened the door and entered the room. The place was packed wall to wall with voodoo apparel. Robes, incense, feathers, books, chests, canes. She'd never seen anything like it before. The place even smelled authentic. Old, enchanting, as if the sense of each place of origin had settled into the room. Is it all real? Navia asked. I mean like real. Like used by priests and priestesses? Not shipped in by some dealer? Look around, child. It all come from someone I knew personally, the lady said and held out a hand towards her store. And where are my manners? Madame Morabou. She gave a slight bow. What bring you in, child? Navia stepped forward a little more. I'm not sure. I just wanted to see if anything spoke to me. Madame Morabou smiled. Her teeth were exquisitely white for an elderly lady. They all speak, child. Just depends on which one you're gonna listen to. Navia gave a slight nod and stood in silence, her eyes inspecting the room. Don't just stand there, child, Madame Morabou said. Go to them and hear their voices. Navia wasn't sure at first, but Madame Morabou's welcoming spirit soon set her at ease. She walked the rows of the store until she arrived at a shelf in the back. She perused the items, then something caught her eye. It was a box about 2 feet wide and 3 feet high. It was made of bones. Navia tilted her head, staring at it. There was a crank on the side of the box, pieced together by finger bones. She reached out to grab it when she felt a tight grip on her wrist. Navia gasped. Madame Morabou had latched onto her hand, and the old lady's face was stern. Just because they speak, child, doesn't mean you should listen. There was a heavy silence in the room as Morabou's words hung in the air. Navia looked at the lady's eyes, then her hand, then back at the box. Where did the box come from? Navia asked. Madame Morabou released her wrist. Just outside of Baton Rouge, a little town called Central. Got it in 1993, but it ain't voodoo, child. Then what is it? Navia asked, lowering her arm. Something darker, much more evil, more dangerous, Morabou said. Like what? You ever heard of the Tetramet, child? Navia shook her head. You see that symbol? Mambu pointed at the box. There was an odd symbol painted on the front. It looked part Christian, part Egyptian, and part pagan. Looks like some type of weird cross, Navia said. It ain't no cross, child. Not the kind you thinking of, Morabou said. It's part his symbol and part hers. Hers? Mm-hmm, Morabou nodded. The Tetramet had his symbol and Lilith had hers. And heaven help us when the two became one. I don't understand, Navia said. You know much about witchcraft, child? No? Navia said, still shaking her head. Well, they got their gods and goddesses too. But these two, Tetramet and Lilith? She adjusted the goat skull on her head. These two, child, they are the original. The patient zeros, so to speak. It was fine for them to worship Lilith all by herself, but the two together, ain't nothing darker, nothing more evil, nothing more dangerous. Now, you'll best pick something else. Moribu turned and walked away. Navia stared at the box. It still spoke to her. It mesmerized her, and she couldn't get its voice out of her head. Madame Moribu? Navia said. Yes, child. Moribu said, her back still facing Navia. How did it all start? Moribu paused, then spoke over her shoulder. Earliest known time was during the reign of King Saul in Israel. But Theodosia gave it new life. Who? Navia asked. Theodosia Whitfield, 1811 to 1824, followed by her brother Charles, North Carolina. That's all you need to know, Moribu said, and then she walked to the front of her store. Navia placed a $20 bill on the shelf, grabbed the bone box, and darted out of the store. Madame Moribu felt her rush by and gave a sly smile. Evil never dies, she said to herself. It simply evolves from one generation to the next. Navia placed the bone box on her dresser and inspected it. She caressed the crank with her fingers and felt the smooth bones against her skin. She gazed at the symbol with squinted eyes and a wrinkled brow. The box was an anomaly for sure, and her curiosity was piqued. She thought about Madame Moribu's words, the warning, and the name Theodosia. There was a powerful magnetism radiating from the box, and it drew her in like the tractor beam of the alien craft she saw on television last night. The box indeed was alien, the mothership. She was its captive, caught within its alluring abnormality. What are you? She said. What secrets do you contain? What mysteries? And Theodosia, who were you? Navia gripped the crank with her hand. Only one way to find out. She turned the crank. Over and over, her hand moved in a circular motion as the bones crackled and crunched. The top of the box popped open, and Navia squealed. A cloud of dust puffed up her nose, and she fought off a sneeze. That's it? She asked with a long face. I thought something would have jumped out. Navia then heard the faint sound of a child's laughter. With her hand still on the box, she glanced over her right shoulder. What? Where? What was that? She stepped away from the dresser and stood at her window. She drew back the curtain, but there were no children playing in the street. What the hell? She crept back over to her dresser, grabbed the box, and flipped it upside down. A folded piece of paper dropped out. Navia sat the box down and picked up the paper. She held it up in the air and studied it. Looks ancient, she said. She heard the child's laughter again. This time she could make it out. It sounded like a little girl. She whipped her head around to look, but there was nothing there. She rolled her shoulders. Whew, you're spooking yourself, child, she said in a voice trying to imitate Madame Moribu. She giggled, then unfolded the paper. There was something written on it. The ink was faded, but she could still make it out. It looked like the handwriting of a child. So she read it aloud. Inside the box is Charles, my brother. He killed his father and his mother. My name is Theo, and I'm his sister. Turn the crank. You'll hear him whisper. The box is made of my brother's bones. Since he died, it's been his home. If you open it, you will die, and join the rest in the sweet by and by. Navia lowered the paper and lifted her eyes in a slow motion towards the box. A cold chill ran up her spine, as if thousands of ants scurried from her tailbone to her neck. What is this shit? She stuffed the paper back into the box. But like it always did, curiosity overran caution. Whispers, huh? Navia said. Let's see. She grasped the crank again. She turned, and turned, and turned. It thundered outside, and storm clouds blackened out the sun. The light grew dim in her room, and the temperature dropped. She placed her ear to the box to listen for Charles' whispers. I see you, I see you, I see you. The whisper was fast, but she heard the words with clarity. What the fuck? She gasped and stumbled backwards. Little girl, pretty skin, heart so dark, let me in. The rapid voice whispered again. Navia lunged forward and slammed the top of the box shut. Stop! She screamed. Shut the fuck up! Silence. Navia ran to her bed, got under the covers, and watched the box. She must have dozed off for a while because she was awakened by the sound of thunder and lightning flashes through her window. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, then fetched her phone off the nightstand. 10:17 p.m. Look. The voice was gravel-laden, like rocks being thrown around in a blender, and it came from the foot of her bed. Time seemed to stand still. Her entire body screamed with a tingling sensation of fear. The voice. It was something from nightmares. But the creature standing at the foot of the bed, it was real. She saw it standing in the shadows. It was pointing to the corner of her room. The lightning flashed and she saw its face. The creature had no eyes. Instead, protruding forth from its sockets were black horns. They curved around the top of its head and rested just above its pointy ears. Its teeth were opaque and looked as though they were just crammed in its mouth. Navia's sight followed its finger to the corner of the room. The lightning flashed again. In the corner stood two figures. One was a little girl in an old pink dress. She had red hair, but her face, she had black eyes, and her skin peeled in places. The other figure was a man wearing a black robe. He was well over 6 feet tall, and he held a meat cleaver at his side. The little girl raised her hand and pointed at Navia. The man in black raised his cleaver. We've marked you, Navia. The box has chosen you, the little girl said. I thought the note said I would die, Navia whispered. Are you calling me a liar? The little girl asked. Navia was silent for a moment, then asked, Are you Theodosia? As sure as this is Charles, Theo said. You feel that under your covers? Navia glanced down at her legs. I don't feel anything, she said. Are you sure? Theo asked. Yeah, Then Navia felt something clasp around her ankles. They felt like hands. He'll take you there, Theo said. Navia screamed as she was dragged down into her mattress. Seconds later, she stood in a bright white room. An old man stood before her. He had an emaciated face and wore a black top hat and black suit. I've been waiting for you, the old man said and stepped to the side. A black dot, the size of a baseball, was hanging in midair in the middle of the room. Come, child, the old man said. I have much to show you. He calls for you. Who? Navia asked. The Tetramet, the old man said. The black dot expanded to a size just large enough for Navia to step through. An invisible force seemed to be carrying her forward. She was about to enter when a bright flash of light overcame the room. Navia winced, closing her eyes. When she opened them, she was back in her bed. What the hell? Navia exclaimed. She rubbed her eyes, then looked to the corner of her room. Theodosia and Charles were still there. You want to see what's inside the black dot? Theodosia asked. Navia sat up, curling her knees to her chest and clinging to her blanket. She shook her head. No. Oh, it's beautiful in there, Theodosia said. Exquisite. Such knowledge of things the human eye was never meant to see. Navia shook her head again, this time with frantic movements. No, no, no. I don't want to see. But you opened the box, Theodosia said. And besides, I want you to see. If I see it, will you leave me alone? Navia asked. Yes, Theodosia said. Navia breathed in deep and exhaled. Okay, I'll look. But how? How do I get back there to where the dot was? Theodosia gave a sideways glance to her brother. Charles will help you. Charles stepped forward, the meat cleaver hanging by his side. Lightning flashed, reflecting off the blade. What? Navia asked. Fear swirled around inside her like a hurricane. All the moisture evaporated from her mouth, and chills erupted all over her body. Charles walked towards her, raising the cleaver, his face hidden in darkness behind his hood. Navia's body quaked in terror. She opened her mouth to scream, but no noise escaped. In her mind, she was scurrying out of the bed and headed towards the door. In reality, she sat there, not moving a muscle. The screams didn't escape her mouth until the blade was on its way towards her. Stop! Navia yelled. The blade landed with a sickening thud in the space between her neck and shoulder. Charles ripped the blade out, flinging streams of blood all over the covers and black wall. A dull burning pain dug deep into Navia's shoulder and neck. The warm blood gushed down her chest, and a copper scent ascended into her nostrils. Charles raised the cleaver again, bringing it down in a slicing motion across her face. The blow knocked Navia backwards against her pillows. She lay on the bed, taking gasping breaths, blood pumping out the wound in her cheek now. It flowed onto the pillows, leaving dark red puddles. Navia died, listening to the snapping and crunching sound of her bones as Charles dismembered her body. Charles threw each severed body part into the floor. Theodosia went and sat down by them. She ripped the skin, sinews, and muscles off with her teeth, gnawing them all the way to the bone. Thank you, Charles, Theodosia said. Now, come help me. It's time for us to build another bone box.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.